On June 17, 2020, Wirecard AG was a blue-chip titan, a member of the DAX 30 and the pride of the German technology sector. It held 1.9 billion euros in cash, roughly 2 billion American dollars, sitting safely in 2 banks in the Philippines. This wasn't a rounding error, it was a quarter of their entire balance sheet. It was the war chest that proved they were profitable, but by the morning of June 18th, that money didn't just move, it didn't get stolen, it didn't get frozen by sanctions, it simply ceased to exist. Here is the paradox that should keep you awake at night. How does a company audited by EY, regulated by BaFin, and traded by the world's largest hedge funds spend a decade counting $2 billion that was never there in the first place? This isn't just a story about fraud. It is a story about a ghost in the machine. A specific accounting loophole called the third-party acquirer that allowed executives to build a skyscraper out of thin air. They didn't rob the bank, they invented the bank. And the most terrifying part? The mechanism they used to do it is still perfectly legal in the fintech world today. To understand the ghost, we have to go to Aschheim, a sleepy suburb of Munich. This is not Silicon Valley. There are no hoodies here. There are only grey suits and Austrian accents. At the centre of it was Markus Braun. He didn't dress like a banker, he dressed like a supervillain from a Christopher Nolan movie. Black turtlenecks, rimless glasses, and a monotone voice that preached about the cashless society. Braun sold a vision that Germany, a country famous for loving physical cash and fearing credit cards, had somehow birthed the next PayPal. Inside the headquarters, the atmosphere wasn't innovative, it was paranoid. If you worked at Wirecard, you knew one thing: you did not ask about the Asian business. You focused on the code, you focused on the German merchants, but you never, ever looked inside the third-party ledgers. Those were handled by the COO, Jan Marsalek, a man who seemed to spend more time in private jets and Libyan conflict zones than in the office. This duo, the technocrat Braun and the spy-like Marsalek, presented a unified front of unstoppable growth. But beneath the polished floor of their HQ, the foundation was rotting. Before they were a DAX giant, Wirecard was something much seedier. In the early 2000s, if you were paying for pornography or online gambling in Europe, you were probably using Wirecard. Why? Because major banks like Deutsche Bank didn't want to touch that money. It was high risk. In the payment processing world, high risk means high fees. If a standard Visa transaction costs a merchant 1%, a gambling transaction might cost 5 or 10% because of the risk of chargebacks, customers claiming they never made the purchase. Wirecard specialized in processing these dirty payments. It's a lucrative business, but it has a ceiling. You can't join the elite stock market index by being the bank for porn sites. You need respectability. You need to process payments for airlines, supermarkets, and fashion brands. But here's the trap. Processing payments for Aldi or Lufthansa has razor-thin margins. You make fractions of a cent. So, Braun and Marsalek faced a choice. Stay small, dirty, and profitable, or go big, clean, and broke. They decided to choose option C. Look big, look clean, but keep the dirty profits flowing, by making them invisible. This is where the psychology of the market kicked in. Investors didn't want to hear about gambling. They wanted a tech growth story. They wanted to believe that Europe finally had its own Google. Markus Braun gave them that story. He spoke in complex algorithms and futuristic buzzwords. If an analyst asked a tough question about cash flow, Braun wouldn't just dodge it. He would attack the premise of the question, implying the analyst was too stupid to understand their disruptive ecosystem. It worked. The stock price climbed. And as the price climbed, the scrutiny vanished. This is a crucial lesson for anyone watching. Success is the ultimate camouflage. When a company is making everyone rich, the shareholders, the auditors, the tax collectors, nobody wants to look in the basement. They consciously choose blindness. Braun knew that as long as the line on the graph went up, he could hide anything. If you want to understand financial fraud, stop looking for criminals and start looking for incentives. Everyone was incentivized to believe the lie. But a lie needs fuel. To keep the stock price rocketing, Wirecard needed to show global domination. They couldn't just be big in Munich. They needed to be big in Asia, the fastest growing market in the world. But there was a massive legal wall in their way. To process credit card payments in Singapore, the Philippines, or Dubai, you need a banking license in those countries. Getting a license takes years of regulatory scrutiny. Scrutiny Wirecard could not survive. So they were stuck. They promised investors explosive Asian growth, but they had no legal way to process payments there. A normal CEO would lower guidance. Braun and Marsalek instead invented a workaround. A system so opaque, so complex and so boring sounding that auditors would just stamp the paper and move on. They called it the third-party acquirer. It sounded like standard outsourcing. In reality, it was the getaway car. Picture this. A team of due diligence investigators flies to the Philippines to visit one of Wirecard's key partners. This partner, a company called PayEasy, is supposedly processing hundreds of millions of euros in transactions. The investigators arrive at the address listed on the documents. They expect a bustling call center, servers humming, hundreds of staff handling credit card disputes. Instead, they find a shared workspace above a bus terminal. There's a retired fisherman who lives there. There are no servers. There are no phones ringing. This was the physical reality of Wirecard's Asian engine. Across Singapore, Manila, and Dubai, the partners generating the bulk of Wirecard's profits were often little more than brass plates on a door or residential homes owned by friends of Jan Marsalek. Yet, back in Germany, the financial reports showed these specific addresses were moving the GDP of a small nation. How do you reconcile an empty room with €1 billion in revenue? You use the TPA model. Here is exactly how the third-party acquirer, TPA, scam works. Listen closely, because this is the engine of the fraud. Normally, if you buy a coffee with a Visa card, the coffee shop's bank, the acquirer, talks to your bank. But Wirecard didn't have licenses in Asia, so they said, we will hire a local company, a TPA, to do the talking for us. The TPA processes the payment for the merchant. The TPA collects the money from the customer. The TPA takes a fee and then, in theory, sends the profit back to Wirecard. Wirecard told its auditors, look, we can't show you the raw transaction data because the TPA owns that data, not us. We just get a commission report at the end of the month. It was the perfect black box. Wirecard could claim they had a partner in Manila processing $1 billion. The partner would send a spreadsheet saying, yes, we processed $1 billion. Your share is $200 million. Wirecard would book that $200 million as profit. But here is the catch. The money didn't come back to Germany. Wirecard claimed that for operational reasons, the cash was kept in the TPA's local bank accounts, so-called escrow accounts or trust accounts. This meant Wirecard could book the revenue on their balance sheet without ever actually having the cash in their own bank. The profit existed only on a PDF sent by a partner that didn't really exist. You might be asking, where were the auditors? Where was EY? This is the most frustrating part of the story. For over a decade, EY signed off on these accounts. Why? Because checking a trust account in the Philippines is hard work. Instead of flying to Manila, walking into the bank, and asking the teller, "Is this money here?" the auditors accepted confirmation letters. These were documents, supposedly from the trustee, saying, "I confirm I am holding 500 million euros for Wirecard." It turns out, anyone with Photoshop can make a confirmation letter. Wirecard capitalized on a fatal flaw in modern auditing. Junior auditors are overworked, underpaid, and terrified of losing a big client. They are checklist tickers. Wirecard gave them a checklist that looked perfect. The TPA model was designed specifically to exploit the laziness of the verification process. As long as there was a piece of paper signed by a trustee, EY considered the money real. But simply making up numbers wasn't enough. Braun wanted to show massive scale. He didn't just want profit, he wanted revenue. Revenue is the vanity metric that tech investors love. So Wirecard pulled a second lever: gross accounting. Imagine you sell a concert ticket for $100. You are just the broker. You only keep $10. A normal company reports $10 revenue. Wirecard, using the TPA model, reported the full $100 as revenue, and then listed the $90 payment to the TPA as an expense. This made their business look 10 times larger than it was. It inflated their importance. It got them into the DAX index. But it created a mathematical time bomb. By inflating the revenue, they also inflated the cash that was supposed to be sitting in those escrow accounts. Every time they lied to boost the stock price, the hole in the trust accounts got bigger. They were digging a grave with a shovel made of gold. September 2018, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. This was the coronation. Wirecard was officially admitted to the DAX 30, the elite club of Germany's most valuable companies. To make room for them, the exchange kicked out Commerzbank, a 150-year-old institution that literally helped rebuild Germany after the war. Think about the symbolism. The old, boring bank with actual branches and vaults was replaced by the invisible fintech wizard. Germany was euphoric. They finally had a player on the world stage to rival Silicon Valley. The stock hit €190 a share. Markus Braun was a billionaire on paper. In the celebratory photos, Braun looks stiff, almost uncomfortable. Perhaps because he knew that the higher they climbed, the harder it would be to hide the empty rooms in Manila. Being in the DAX brings attention. Index funds have to buy you, but huge global short sellers start watching you. With the eyes of the world now on them, the missing cash problem was getting critical. They couldn't just invent profit forever. Eventually, a business needs to spend money. They needed to pay dividends, buy companies, and pay auditors. You can't pay auditors with imaginary escrow money. So they started round-tripping. This is a classic fraud maneuver. Wirecard would take real money from their German bank, money from actual loans or bond sales, send it to a shell company in Dubai for software development, and that shell company would send it back to Wirecard as customer revenue. It's like taking a $100 bill from your left pocket, putting it in your right pocket, and claiming you just earned $100. It solves the revenue problem, but it drains cash. You are paying taxes on fake profit, and you are losing money on transaction fees to move the cash around. The TPA network wasn't just a passive ledger anymore. It was an active washing machine, spinning money across borders to create the illusion of commerce. The complexity was the point. Complexity is the best defense against investigation. Not everyone was drinking the Kool-Aid. Inside Wirecard's Singapore office, a few employees noticed the discrepancies. They saw invoices for millions of dollars for marketing analysis from companies that didn't have websites. One whistleblower, a legal counsel, tried to raise the alarm. But Wirecard didn't just ignore whistleblowers, they hunted them. The company culture, driven by Marsalek, was aggressive. When the whistleblower flagged the round-tripping in India, they were isolated, shouted down, and eventually pushed out. Marsalek wasn't just a COO, he ran the company like an intelligence agency. He bragged about having the formula for Novichok nerve gas. He had contacts in Libyan militias. He used this aura of danger to silence internal dissent. If you questioned the accounting, you weren't just a bad employee, you were an enemy of the state. But the silence couldn't hold. Outside the company, skeptical investors were gathering. A shadowy research outfit called Zatara released a report accusing Wirecard of widespread fraud. They alleged that the Asian business was largely fake. Wirecard's response was immediate and brutal. They didn't just deny it, they claimed it was a criminal conspiracy to manipulate the stock price. And here is where the story gets truly bizarre. The German regulator BaFin looked at the allegations of billion-dollar fraud, and they looked at the short sellers raising the alarm, and they decided to investigate the short sellers. They filed criminal complaints against the people telling the truth. Wirecard had successfully weaponized the German government against its own critics. But across the channel, a reporter at the Financial Times was reading the Zatara report, and he decided to make a phone call. Dan McCrum of the Financial Times became the nemesis. For years, he hammered Wirecard. He published internal spreadsheets. He published testimony from the Singapore whistleblowers. In any normal market, the stock would have collapsed. But this was a cult stock. When McCrum published his articles, Wirecard's online army, bots and angry retail investors attacked him. They called him corrupt. Wirecard hired private investigators to follow him. There were attempts to hack his email. It was psychological warfare. And BaFin? In 2019, in an unprecedented move, BaFin banned short selling on Wirecard stock. Think about that. The regulator stepped in to prevent people from betting against the fraud. They effectively government guaranteed the bubble. This bought Wirecard time, but it also raised the stakes. The Financial Times wasn't going to stop. To silence the noise once and for all, Wirecard made a fatal, arrogance-fueled mistake. Under immense pressure to prove they were clean, Wirecard hired KPMG. This was a special audit. The goal was to have a reputable third party, not their usual auditor EY, come in, look at the books, and tell the world it's all real. Markus Braun was convinced he could charm or fool KPMG, just like he had fooled everyone else. But a special audit is different from a regular audit. Regular auditors look for consistency. Forensic auditors look for crime. KPMG started asking for the raw data from the TPAs. Wirecard said, "Ask the partners." The partners, the TPAs, ghosted KPMG. They delayed meetings. They claimed data privacy laws prevented them from sharing the server logs. KPMG wasn't buying it. They kept digging. They asked for the bank statements. Not the confirmation letters, the actual statements. This was the one thing Wirecard could not produce, because the bank accounts were empty. The walls were closing in, but Marsalek had one final, desperate trick up his sleeve. Panic set in at the Munich HQ. They needed to show KPMG that the 1.9 billion euros existed. But it didn't. So they had to forge the evidence. But we aren't talking about a little whiteout on a receipt. This was an industrial-scale forgery operation. Wirecard executives, allegedly orchestrated by Marsalek, began creating fake bank confirmations from the two Philippine banks, BDO Unibank and BPI. They bought the correct paper stock. They forged the signatures of bank employees. They even set up fake email addresses aimed at tricking KPMG into thinking the emails were coming from the bank. It was frantic. It was sloppy. At one point, they were literally pasting digital signatures onto PDFs. They were trying to fool one of the world's top forensic accounting firms with arts and crafts projects. It shows the sheer desperation. They believed if they could just survive this audit, they could figure out a way to fill the hole later. The release date for the KPMG report arrived, April 28, 2020. Wirecard investors expected a clean bill of health. Instead, KPMG dropped a bomb. They didn't say, "It's a fraud." Auditors rarely speak that plainly. They said something worse. "We cannot verify the existence of the revenues." They stated clearly that the TPAs had refused to cooperate and that the bank balances could not be independently confirmed. The stock crashed. The spell was broken. For the first time, the market realized that the emperor might not just be naked. He might not even be there. But Wirecard didn't fold yet. Markus Braun went on TV and claimed KPMG had found no evidence of fraud. He lied to the bitter end. But now, EY, the regular auditor, was terrified. They had to sign the annual report in June. If they signed a fraudulent report after KPMG raised doubts, they would be destroyed. So EY finally did what they should have done 10 years ago. They decided to call the bank in Manila directly. June 2020. The deadline for the annual report is days away. EY sends inquiries directly to BDO Unibank and BPI in the Philippines. They attach the documents Wirecard had provided, the trust confirmations showing 1.9 billion euros. The reply from the Philippine banks was short and devastating. "We do not know this client. These documents are spurious." Spurious is a polite banker word for fake. Wirecard tried to stall. Marsalek claimed it was a misunderstanding. He said the trustee was moving the money. He tried to claim the banks were lying. But the game was up. On June 18th, the scheduled date for the financial results, Wirecard put out a press release. It didn't contain profit figures. It contained a single sentence that erased a decade of history. There are indications that bank trust account balances in the amount of 1.9 billion euros do not exist. The stock fell 60% in minutes. Billions of euros of market value evaporated before lunch. The paradox was resolved. The money wasn't missing, it was never there. When a company admits it has a 1.9 billion euro hole in its balance sheet, it is instantly insolvent. Why? Because that cash was the collateral for all their loans. Banks like Commerzbank and ING had lent Wirecard hundreds of millions based on the belief that this cash cushion existed. Once the cash vanished, the loans were called in immediately. Wirecard had no liquidity. The real business, the low-margin European payment processing, wasn't making enough money to service the debt. Within a week, the DAX champion filed for insolvency. It was the first time in history a DAX member had collapsed. It was a national humiliation for Germany. The tech giant was revealed to be a Ponzi scheme wrapped in an Excel spreadsheet. But while the investors were weeping, the architect of the scheme was busy making travel arrangements. Markus Braun turned himself in. He looked shell-shocked. To this day, his defense is that he was a victim, that Marsalek and a gang of rogue employees stole the money behind his back. He claims he truly believed the billions were there. Whether he was a master criminal or the world's most oblivious CEO is for the courts to decide. But the man who could answer that question was gone. On the day of the collapse, Jan Marsalek walked out of the Munich office. He told colleagues he was going to the Philippines to find the missing money and clear his name. He texted a friend, "Don't worry, I'm fixing this." Then he boarded a private jet. But the flight plan didn't say Manila. Marsalek didn't go to Asia. He flew to Minsk, Belarus. From there, intelligence agencies believe he was transported to Russia. It turns out the COO of Wirecard had deep ties to the GRU, Russian Military Intelligence. The missing billions? Some theories suggest they were used to fund black ops, mercenaries, or just lined the pockets of corrupt officials in the East. While German police were searching his house in Munich, Marsalek was likely already in a safe house near Moscow. The man who invented the TPA loophole, who forged the documents, who charmed the DAX, was not just a fraudster, he was a ghost. And he took the secrets of the third-party acquirers with him. The fallout was nuclear. The Wirecard offices were raided. BaFin's leadership was forced to resign. The German government launched a parliamentary inquiry. Angela Merkel had to testify about why she promoted Wirecard on a diplomatic trip to China while the company was under investigation. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Retail investors, regular people who put their retirement savings into the safe German tech stock, lost everything. The physical assets of Wirecard were sold off for scrap. The technology was bought by competitors for pennies. The German PayPal was dead. But the most disturbing part of the aftermath wasn't the financial loss. It was the realization of how easy it was. Wirecard didn't use supercomputers to hack the banking system. They used Microsoft Word and a few compliant friends in Manila. In retrospect, the mechanics of the fraud were shockingly simple. They exploited the gap of trust between jurisdictions. German auditors trusted Philippine documents. Philippine banks assumed the German company was legitimate because it was in the DAX. BaFin assumed the accounts were real because EY signed them. EY signed them because the trustees confirmed them. It was a circle of blind trust. The third-party acquirer model is still used today. It is a legitimate tool for many fintechs to access foreign markets. That is what makes this so dangerous. Wirecard didn't invent a new type of financial weapon. They just took a standard industry practice and weaponized the lack of transparency. They proved that in a globalized financial system, you can hide a black hole in the spaces between borders. If you put the lie in a jurisdiction where the auditor doesn't speak the language and doesn't want to travel, you can sustain the illusion for a decade. The Wirecard story is often compared to Enron. But Enron was about complex derivatives and mark-to-market accounting. Wirecard was dumber. It was about fake bank accounts. The lesson here is not about accounting standards. It is about national champions. Germany wanted Wirecard to be real so badly that they attacked anyone who pointed out the fake mustache. The establishment protected the predator because the predator made them look good. BaFin employees were trading the stock. The political elite were lobbying for it. It reveals a terrifying truth about capitalism. Truth is secondary to the narrative. If the story is good enough and the profits look real enough, the gatekeepers will open the gates wide. They won't just let the wolf in. They will give him a seat at the dinner table. Wirecard is gone. Markus Braun is on trial. Jan Marsalek is a fugitive in Moscow. But the mechanism, the TPA loophole, the confirmation letters, the offshore trust accounts, is still part of the global financial plumbing. Right now, there are dozens of fintech companies trading at massive valuations that rely on opaque partner networks in high-risk jurisdictions. They use the same cross-border complexity to obscure their true cash flow. The auditors promise they fix their procedures. They promise they verify bank balances now. But do they? Or are they just waiting for the next confirmation letter to arrive in the mail? The 1.9 billion euros didn't disappear. It was never there. The wealth that vanished from your pension fund, however, was very real. The next Wirecard isn't a hypothetical. It's likely already in your portfolio, hiding behind a third-party agreement in a country you can't point to on a map. If you want to understand the machinery that eats your money while you sleep, make sure you are subscribed. We investigate the systems, not just the scandals. Good night.